I want you to just picture a scene for a second. Close your eyes and imagine you are standing on a beach. It's the year 1652.
And we're not talking about a sunny, pristine resort here.
Right. No, definitely not. It is the dead of night. You are surrounded by these dense, dark, just completely choked mangrove swamps on the western shores of Puerto Rico. Right around, what we'd call modern-day Lajas or Cabo Rojo today.
Yeah, totally isolated.
Exactly. And officially, legally speaking, the sand you are standing on belongs entirely to the Spanish Empire.
Right.
King Philip IV rules this land with an absolute commercial monopoly.
Right, which means no foreign ships are allowed to dock.
None. Zero. No foreign cloths can be bought, and the local crops, they cannot be sold to outsiders, period.
It's supposed to be this entirely closed imperial loop. I mean, a hermetically sealed economy dictated entirely by decrees from Madrid.
But out there, just bobbing in the dark waters of the Mona Passage is a massive Dutch merchant vessel. It just sailed up from the free trading hub of Curaçao, and it's dropping its anchors right off the coast.
Right in the Spanish king's backyard.
Yeah. And you aren't standing on that beach alone. Waiting in the shadows of the mangroves with you, loading up these small rowboats, is a massive, highly organized family network.
And these aren't rogue pirates, right?
No, not at all. They aren't pirates. They aren't random farmers. They are the Antunes and the Rodríguez de Olivencia clans. And they are currently running one of the most successful, sophisticated shadow cartels in the early modern world.
Which is just incredible. What we are looking at here is really a masterclass in subverting an empire, and it's orchestrated entirely from the margins. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Yes, welcome.
We are exploring a genuinely remarkable stack of historical sources today. We're pulling from archival paleography, regional municipal genealogies, and the actual deeply chilling 17th century Inquisition trial transcripts from the Caribbean.
Yeah, those transcripts are wild. Our mission today is to unpack exactly how these two families built this shadow cartel. We're going to look at how they bypassed those strict royal monopolies, how they weaponized Spanish legal loopholes, and honestly, how they managed to survive the terrifying reach of the Inquisition.
By essentially building a mafia-style kinship network.
Exactly. And I have to say, the narrative we uncover here pushes right past those cliche stories of the Caribbean. We are so used to the swashbuckling pirates, the grand royal galleons, the big naval battles.
Make a Hollywood version.
Right. But this gets at the real drivers of the early Atlantic economy. This is about self-organizing family businesses that prioritize their own survival and profit over, whatever flag was flying back in Europe.
Which demonstrates perfectly how history is actually forged from the bottom up. Distant kings and royal ministers, they love to draw lines on maps and issue grand commercial decrees. But the reality on the ground, or in this case, the reality on the muddy shores of the Caribbean, is dictated by the people who actually have to carve a life out of that landscape.
Right.
The Antunes family and their local allies prove that colonial survival wasn't about blindly following imperial law. It was about navigating around it.
So, okay, they're sitting on the beach in the dark, trading with the Dutch. But risking the wrath of the Spanish Empire seems insane unless you have absolutely no other choice.
Right.
Like, how desperate was San Germán? Why go to these extremes?
Well, to understand the sheer desperation of the situation, you really have to look at the geography of 17th century Puerto Rico. San Germán commanded the entire western half of the island,
Okay.
but it was profoundly isolated. It was separated from the governor's watchful eyes in the official ports in San Juan by this incredibly rugged, virtually impassable central mountain range.
So you couldn't just take a cart over to the next town?
No, not at all. There were no paved roads connecting them, just these treacherous trails that would take days or even weeks to navigate, especially if it was the rainy season.
Wow, so it was essentially a separate colony altogether.
For all practical purposes, yeah, it was. And because of that isolation, San Germán was completely starved for manufactured goods. Spain operated its empire on a rigid official fleet system.
The famous treasure fleets, right?
Exactly. Massive royal convoys would sail from Seville, but they only stopped at major hubs, Havana, Veracruz, or sometimes San Juan. They rarely, if ever, bothered to sail all the way around to western Puerto Rico just to drop off basic supplies.
That makes sense.
So put yourself in the shoes of a local settler trying to build a life there. You need an iron axe to clear your land. You need flour to bake bread. You need basic textiles to clothe your family.
And you just can't get them.
You cannot get those things legally. And if a Spanish merchant actually does make that grueling overland trek from San Juan, the monopoly prices they charge are astronomically high. You are trapped in an economic dead zone.
But just a few days sail to the south, you have the exact opposite economic environment. You have Curaçao.
Yes. Curaçao was the perfect geopolitical counterweight here. The Dutch had captured it from the Spanish in 1634, and their colonial strategy was, well, it was entirely different.
They weren't doing the monopoly thing.
Right. They didn't want a closed monopoly. They transformed the island into a massive, booming, open market transit hub. Curaçao had warehouses just bursting with everything the settlers in San Germán needed.
Iron tools, cloth.
European textiles, spices, and a constant, abundant supply of enslaved labor.
Okay, so the intense local demand in San Germán is sitting right next door to this massive supply in Curaçao. They just needed a mechanism to connect the two. And the sources point to this man named Antonio Antunes as the primary architect of that connection.
Yes, a very key figure.
He is described in the records as a Portuguese New Christian, which is a critical piece of his identity that we will definitely unpack in a moment. But economically speaking, he is a major landowner operating a highly productive cacao farm in western Puerto Rico.
And the sheer logistics of his operation are staggering.
Yeah, because Spain's official economy runs on silver, right?
Right.
But out on the fringes of the empire, silver coin is incredibly scarce. So Antonio basically bypasses the imperial currency entirely.
He turns his agricultural yield into liquid capital. I mean, cacao wasn't just a luxury crop meant to be ground into chocolate for European aristocrats.
Right.
In a world starved of Spanish silver, cacao was a highly stable, universally desired commodity. Antonio could harvest thousands of pounds of cacao beans and use them to balance massive ledgers directly with these Dutch captains.
It's brilliant.
It was a perfectly complementary, self-sustaining system. The Dutch West India Company and these independent Dutch traders, they desperately needed raw materials.
Like the cacao, the cattle hides, tobacco.
Exactly, to send back to the markets in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And Antonio needed the textiles and the iron tools the Dutch were hauling out of Curaçao.
But the audacity of this is wild when you think about the legal environment. The Spanish crown considers any foreign vessel in its waters a hostile threat. If a Dutch ship pulls into a Spanish port, the military is supposed to seize the cargo and imprison the crew. So how do they actually get the goods off the ship and onto the island without triggering a massive military response?
They utilized a highly specific, perfectly legal loophole written deep into Spanish maritime law.
Of course they did.
It was known as the Arribada Forzosa, which roughly translates to the forced arrival or the forced emergency landing.
Okay, how did that work?
Well, Spanish law was incredibly strict about keeping foreigners out, but it did have a humanitarian exception built into the code. If a foreign ship was caught in a massive hurricane and sustained heavy structural damage, or, if the crew was genuinely starving and out of fresh water...
They couldn't just let them die.
Right. They were legally permitted to drop anchor in a Spanish harbor. They could stay just long enough to make emergency repairs and buy vital provisions out of Christian charity.
The mechanics of how they abuse this are fascinating. It's basically an elaborate insurance scam.
It really is.
It's like you crash your car on purpose just to get a free paint job. But the entire scheme only works if the mechanic doing the assessment is your brother. The Dutch captains would just roll up to these unmonitored bays near San Germán, like Mayaguez, and claim that a terrible storm had spontaneously shredded their sails, conveniently right in front of this highly lucrative cacao farm.
The insurance scam analogy holds up perfectly because in this scenario, the smugglers completely controlled the claims adjuster.
Ah, the magistrate.
Exactly. The local Spanish magistrate was the one who had to officially verify the emergency. So the Dutch captain would row ashore, walk into the magistrate's office, and file a highly formal, incredibly detailed affidavit. He would swear under oath that his ship was taking on water, or that his mainmast was splintered, or his crew was dying of thirst.
And the local officials would just stamp the paperwork and look the other way.
Totally. By day, the official royal ledgers showed that the Spanish locals were graciously trading a few barrels of fresh water and some hardtack biscuits to desperate Dutch sailors.
A shining example of imperial Christian charity.
Truly. But by night, the reality was entirely different. Under the cover of darkness, massive, coordinated crews of locals would row out to the Dutch vessel. They would offload thousands of pounds of Antonio Antunes' cacao, massive stacks of cattle hides, and tobacco.
And then bring on the smuggled goods.
Right. They would load up the Dutch textiles, the iron tools, and the enslaved Africans. By the time the sun came up, the repairs were miraculously finished. The Dutch ships sailed back out to the Mota Passage, and the Spanish paperwork remained perfectly pristine.
You know, if I'm a wealthy smuggler running an operation of this magnitude, my first instinct is just to bribe the mayor and be done with it. Use that cacao wealth to buy off the local guards, pay the magistrates to look the other way, and just keep the business strictly transactional.
Sure, that makes sense on paper.
Right. So why didn't they just bribe the local authorities? Why did the Antunes family go to the extreme length of arranging the incredibly complex strategic marriages that we see in the municipal genealogies?
Because a bribe is a short-term transaction, and it is inherently volatile, bribes only work as long as the person you are paying stays bought.
True.
If you are aiming to build a multi-generational empire, a bribe is just far too risky. And to understand why the risk was existential, we have to look closer at who the Antunes family actually were. Remember, the sources identify them as Portuguese New Christians.
Meaning they were converted Jews.
Specifically, they were crypto-Jews. During the late 1400s, the Spanish and Portuguese crowns gave their Jewish populations a brutal, absolute ultimatum. Convert to Catholicism, leave the peninsula, or face death.
Just a horrific choice.
Yeah. And thousands converted on paper, becoming new Christians, but secretly maintained their Jewish faith, their traditions, and community ties in private. The Spanish Inquisition was an institution explicitly designed to hunt down these secret practitioners.
Okay, so if you are a crypto-Jewish family like the Antunes, and you are running an illegal smuggling ring with Protestant Dutchmen, you are walking a tightrope over a very active volcano.
Exactly. A single denunciation to a local priest ruins everything.
Wow.
A single local official deciding he wants a bigger cut of the profits and threatening to expose your religious practices means you lose your business, your property, and potentially your life. You cannot trust outsiders, which is why they didn't just bribe the local authorities. They absorbed them. They married them.
Looking at the municipal genealogies and the sources, the family tree just loops back in on itself to build an impenetrable fortress.
It's very intentional.
You have the Antunes family systematically marrying their sons and daughters into the powerful Rodríguez de Olivencia clan, and also the González de Matos family. The records highlight this one woman in particular, Vicencia Ignacia Antunes Pinto, whose marriage directly into the Olivencia line cemented this massive alliance. It operates quite literally like a Mafia-style blood pact.
It does. The intermarriages solve two massive existential problems for this cartel. First, it solved the issue of trust. If your business partners are your brothers-in-law, your cousins, and the godparents to your children.
A betrayal of the smuggling ring is a betrayal of the family itself.
Exactly. You are binding the economic survival of the cartel directly to the social and biological survival of the family. It creates an almost unbreakable code of silence.
And the second problem is solved.
Asset protection.
Ah.
This is where we see their deep, sophisticated understanding of Spanish imperial law. If the Inquisition or the royal authorities caught you smuggling or caught you secretly practicing Judaism, their immediate first step before a trial even began was sequestration.
So they freeze your assets.
They legally freeze and seize all of your property. Your house, your cacao farm, your slaves, your cattle, everything was confiscated by the crown to pay for the costs of your own trial.
That's brutal.
But if the legal deeds to your land were technically held in the name of your new brother-in-law from the Rodríguez de Olivencia family, a man who is an established, old Christian local official with a spotless record and no suspicion of Jewish ancestry.
The Inquisition couldn't touch the property.
Precisely. The wealth of the cartel was shielded behind the unimpeachable legal identities of their in-laws.
They essentially laundered their property deeds through their extended family tree. The political cover this provided is astounding. The sources show that men from the Olivencia clan routinely served as alcaldes, mayors and city councilmen in San Germán.
Yes, they were the establishment.
So when royal inspectors from the governor in San Juan finally did come down to the coast to investigate rumors of Dutch smugglers, the people handing them the official reports were the Olivencias. They were literally writing the report saying, "We have investigated ourselves and we are shocked to report that we found absolutely no smuggling here whatsoever."
They became the law in order to break the law safely. They created a perfectly insulated, self-regulating ecosystem on the western coast.
But the system is insulated locally. San Germán is still technically on the map. What happens when Madrid or the regional powers decide to look closer? because the perfect system always faces an ultimate test.
That is very true.
And for the Antunes Olivencia cartel, that test comes roaring in from across the ocean.
Right. The geopolitical landscape shifts entirely in 1640, and it turns violently against them. This is where the narrative really pivots from a clever economic loophole to a desperate fight for survival.
What happened in 1640?
In 1640, Portugal successfully revolts against Spain, ending what was known as the Iberian Union. For 60 years, Spain and Portugal had been ruled by the same king. Now they are bitter enemies fighting a war of restoration. Suddenly, every single Portuguese person living within the Spanish Empire is viewed with intense, paranoid suspicion.
So if you're a Portuguese New Christian like the Antunes, you're no longer just a potential religious heretic in the eyes of the Spanish crown.
No, you are much more dangerous now.
You are now heavily suspected of being a political traitor, like a spy working to undermine the empire from within.
Exactly. The paranoia in Madrid reaches a boiling point, and the crown issues sweeping decrees to investigate the Portuguese diaspora. This mandate spills over into the Caribbean, and it all comes to a terrifying head in 1652.
Okay.
The Inquisition Tribunal, based in Cartagena de Indias, which was essentially the supreme religious and legal authority for that entire region of the Caribbean, launches a massive investigation. They call it the Complicidad Portuguesa, the Portuguese conspiracy.
And the methods the inquisitors use they're brutal.
The inquisitors were absolutely relentless. They began arresting suspected merchants all across the Spanish Main in Cartagena, in Portobello, in Havana, and they utilized horrific methods to extract information.
The torture chambers.
Yes, under the extreme physical pressure of torture, or just after rotting in isolation in damp inquisitorial dungeons for months on end, these arrested merchants began to break. The psychological terror of the Inquisition was designed to shatter loyalties.
Which it did.
The merchants started giving up names, they surrendered hidden ledgers, they mapped out the secret shipping routes for the interrogators.
And all those ledgers, all those shipping routes given up in the torture chambers of Cartagena start pointing like a compass needle right back to the western coast of Puerto Rico, right back to San Germán and the Antunes cacao farms.
The inquisitorial net is suddenly cast over this isolated shadow cartel. The isolation that protected them for decades was no longer enough.
Reading the actual Inquisition transcripts from the sources is one of the most jarring experiences.
Yeah.
Because you have this terrifying dual nature to the paperwork.
Oh, absolutely.
On one hand, the inquisitors are acting like forensic accountants. The records are full of incredibly detailed bureaucratic logs, how many Dutch textiles were on a specific ship, what the exact exchange rate of cacao per enslaved person was. It reads like a modern corporate audit.
Right.
But right next to that, in the very same transcript, is this chilling obsession with the most mundane, private household habits.
It is a profound cultural tragedy hidden inside sterile legal paperwork. The inquisitors didn't just care about the smuggling. Honestly, economic crimes were secondary.
They wanted the heresy.
Yes. They were desperate to prove that the Antunes and their network were secretly practicing Judaism, which meant they hyper-fixated on domestic behaviors. Because in the eyes of the Inquisition, your daily routine was the truest indicator of your soul's allegiance.
Wow.
The transcripts show them interrogating servants and neighbors, asking things like, did this family change their bed linens on Friday nights before the Sabbath?
I'm so specific.
Did they refuse to eat pork? When a family member died, did they turn the body toward the wall and wash it according to Jewish rites before burial?
Just put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine knowing that the way you wash your bed sheets on a Friday, or what meat you choose to buy at the market, could literally be weaponized in a court of law to have you executed. The paranoia must have been suffocating.
It would have been unbearable.
You're reading about cacao profit margins one second, and the next second, a family is on trial for their lives because of when they get their laundry.
The stakes shifted instantly. This wasn't about protecting the cacao trade anymore. This was about saving their families from the auto da fe, the horrific public execution where convicted heretics were burned at the stake.
So how do they survive this? The Inquisition have the ledgers, they have the names, they are interrogating the servants about the Friday night linens, the cartel is completely exposed. How does the Antunes Olivencia network not just immediately collapse under the weight of the Spanish Empire?
They survived by deploying the exact same resources that built their cartel in the first place. Immense liquid wealth and an unbreakable local network.
Okay, how did that work in practice?
Well, first, they used their deep financial pockets to fight a war of attrition in the courts. When the tribunal issued an arrest order or a summons, the families would hire the best legal minds available to tie the case up in years, sometimes decades, of procedural appeals.
So they stalled.
They flooded the courts with paperwork, contesting jurisdiction, demanding new witnesses, questioning the validity of testimonies.
They basically just buried the inquisitors in their own bureaucracy.
They did. And while the lawyers stalled the courts, they used their wealth to literally buy new legal identities. They would forge limpeza de sangre purity of blood certificates.
But wait, how does one actually forge an imperial document of that magnitude in the 17th century?
Right.
You can't exactly just print one out in Puerto Rico.
Oh, it was a massive, incredibly expensive logistical operation. You would have to hire agents in Seville or Lisbon.
Across the ocean.
Yes, those agents would use your smuggling wealth to bribe local parish priests in Europe to retroactively insert your family name into old physical baptismal registries.
That is insane.
And then they would pay royal notaries to seal official documents falsely swearing that the Antunes family had zero Jewish ancestry, that they were generations of pure old Christians.
Wow.
Those forged documents then had to be loaded onto a galleon and shipped all the way back across the Atlantic to be presented to the courts in the Caribbean. The sheer cost and time involved in that operation is a testament to the massive wealth they generated from the cacao trade.
It's the 17th century equivalent of buying a fake passport, but you are buying an entirely new bloodline to clear a religious background check.
Exactly. And if the legal appeals failed and the forged certificates weren't enough to call off the inquisitors, they used the ultimate escape hatch, the Caribbean itself.
They ran.
The same secret Dutch shipping routes that brought the textiles in could take a wanted person out. It became an underground railroad. Family members in immediate danger of arrest would simply vanish. They would slip onto a Dutch vessel in the dead of night and head back to Curaçao, completely beyond the reach of the Spanish crown. Or they would utilize their deep ties with the Olivencia clan to fade away into the rugged, unmapped interior of Puerto Rico, where no royal inspector would ever find them.
They just melted into the landscape they had spent decades controlling. It's an incredible story of resilience. They were hunted by the most powerful religious and political apparatus of the age, and they outmaneuvered it through sheer local dominance.
They absolutely did.
And what I find so fascinating about the end of this narrative is that all this illicit wealth, all the cacao profits and Dutch trade money, it didn't just disappear when the Inquisition came knocking.
No, it absolutely did not disappear. In fact, that capital became the bedrock of the region's future.
Right. The sources point out that the wealth amassed by this shadow cartel actually funded the physical and economic expansion of Puerto Rico's western coast.
Yep.
The descendants of the Antunes and Olivencia families took those smuggling profits and used them to clear more land, build deeper infrastructure, and lay the foundations for major, modern Puerto Rican cities that still exist today. The architecture and economic baseline of cities like Mayagüez and Cabo Rojo can trace their roots directly back to those midnight trades in the mangroves.
If we look at the legacy of the sources we explored today, it really exposes the profound tension between the laws written by distant empires and palaces in Madrid and the gritty, practical reality of how colonial families actually survived.
Right, they didn't care about Madrid.
No. They didn't build the Caribbean on royal decrees or official trade fleets. They built it on muddy beaches at midnight, using cacao, forged papers, and incredibly strong family bonds.
It completely flips the script on how we think about history and how civilizations expand. Which brings me to a final thought I want you to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive.
Okay.
We just spent this entire time talking about how the foundations of modern cities and entire regional economies were quite literally built on black market smuggling, forged identities, and illicit shadow networks.
Yeah, illegal survival tactics.
Right. It makes you wonder, as you look around at our world today, how many of our modern, highly respected institutions, families, or even entire industries actually started out exactly like this? How many of the structures we revere today were just shadow cartels that simply managed to outlast the empires that were trying to destroy them? Next time you were standing on a beach at night, looking out into the dark water, maybe give that some thought.
A genuinely fascinating question to leave on.
Always more to learn. Until next time, keep digging into the past.